Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Danny Abul-Ella. I'm the head of our account management and customer success team at RentMoola and our new brand, LetUs. Yeah, today we want to speak a little bit of how we can empower property managers and renters alike in this difficult time. But let me walk you through that. First of all, thanks for joining the presentation today. Let me directly jump into the topic with a big topic. So we were asking our property managers about their biggest current challenges. In one sentence, one can say tenants are expecting more in a situation where our property managers already have a lot on their plate. Property managers' job profile, it has become a bit more, I would say, burdensome. And this trend is now accelerating, of course, also due to COVID-19. Needs are changing, and the digitalization is, I would say, accelerating due to COVID-19. We are in a comparatively distressed renters environment, and we were in a distressed renters environment already. This is something I would like to introduce you to today. And this environment, it's taking a financial toll on renters and landlords alike. But let me elaborate a little bit more in depth here. Okay. Over the time, residents' interest in rental technologies, it has massively grown. And by the way, it's not only millennials. Yeah, they're the most enthusiastic ones about technology, but we were discovering that more than half of Gen Z, of Gen X, and even the baby boomers, they are far more interested in technology than, for example, a year ago. They want to be able to pay their rent online, and they have a decent technology need for technologies in place, for example, to communicate with their property managers digitally. It's a trend, and that trend is growing, and it's even accelerating again in regards to this growth. It has been happening before COVID, yes, but COVID is one of the strongest accelerators for these technology solutions that renters want. So one can say, if one wants to differentiate oneself as a property manager, then these are the digital touch points to be prioritized right now. Let's start with the rent payment online. 65% want to be able to pay rent online. 58% were stating that communicating via text and email, communicating digitally, is important. Close to 50% want to have access to a resident portal, while 45% were filling maintenance requests online. Our source here was a research from Belgium that has been done with a sample size of 1,000 to 2,000 people. This is a chart that's, I'd say, very interesting, because the three statistics on the left side on this chart, they are pre-pandemic. So before COVID-19, more than half of Canadians were already living paycheck to paycheck, with rent as the biggest expense. One can also look at this in another way. So 30% of the overall available income needed to be paid for rent, pre-pandemic. Thus, 40% of North Americans would have struggled to cover $400 bills if they would appear unexpected. And I think this is honestly worth thinking about it, in my opinion at least, because, I mean, imagine you have an average car repair. This can be more expensive. When your dog needs to go to the vet, then you're already in such a situation where you have a financial shortfall. So in short, there is a certain overall market risk. Now the pandemic came up, and it had to happen. What happened, and 46% of Canadians are $200 or less away from a financial insolvency. And 32% of Americans, they were not able to make their rent payment. And this has happened. So we are looking at this retrospectively right now. We have 21.5 billion overdue rent payments in North America right now. The thing that's new is this is a widespread issue. that is concerning. We're reaching a point where it's critical. And these trends are kind of like changing behaviors. They're changing needs on both the property manager side and, of course, the tenant side alike. So we have shown that in the previous slide already. COVID has intensified an already intense situation. And when a renter must spend more than 30% of their income on housing, we call that cost burdened. When the same renter, however, has to pay half of the income on housing costs, one can consider that as being severely cost burdened. It has a negative impact, and that negative impact is that having a renter who has to sacrifice money that were, for example, left aside for other financial requirements to be ensured that one can pay rent on time. In percentage, again, 63% of renters right now have drawn on savings, borrowed or sold assets only to keep up with rent. Okay, what did we do so far? We were looking at pre-pandemic numbers. We were looking on current pandemic numbers. Let's try to paint a picture out of that, because there's a certain overall market development that goes along with these numbers. And this is very interesting. It's worth having a look at. We basically identified three waves here. Three waves of, let's say, rental market developments in relation to these findings. In the first wave, in the first phases, it has become very clear that digital rent payments are very important, obviously. Digital payments have been the norm for buying a lot of things online, but the rental market had not adapted that fully. And even with other demographics that preferred checks or cash payments, social distancing has happened. We had those lockdowns, bank branches were closed. That has accelerated the need for a more disruptive payment solution. Because in a nutshell, it's very obvious. Tenants needed to be enabled to make their rent payment from home, like if you buy a book from Amazon. But because of the high unemployment rate, we were then identifying a second wave. And with the pandemic and with the uncertainty of how long this strange situation will last, people wanted to preserve cash, put cash aside, have cash in the bank for emergencies. And this is when we, for the first time, saw a real uptick. An uptick in other credit solutions, for example, credit cards. And the specialty here was, the uptick was for using credit cards, for example, even for making a necessity payment like rent. But as we all know, the nature of credit cards, you can literally only buy yourself 30 to maybe maximally 60 days. Now, rent is still due, and people need to pay both their credit cards bills and, of course, the correlated interest on them. But what people did not know back then, and I think we still don't know today, is about the length of this actual crisis. So this third wave that we were identifying is a wave that leads to, or does not necessarily lead to, but is correlated to a cash cliff. And this requires more long-term oriented credit solutions. And as always, unfortunately, when people are in need, there are a lot of predatory credit loans that have risen and become very prominent on the market. Predatory credit loans with high interests that are basically capitalizing on the distressed situation of the tenants. Basically, there's an increased demand for liquidity on both sides, because landlords, property managers, they still have to pay their bills as well. So it's a negative deviation in cash flow that results out of that. So we had half of North Americans' rent payment at risk, and a described increased property managers' complexity and cost structure. And this leads to the assumption that one needs a solution that pays into these issues, where basically both groups, the property managers and the tenants, are set up for success in this special environment. And we want to put both property managers and tenants in a win-win situation here by mitigating risk better, by enabling the property managers to make smarter decisions with more comprehensive reports, for example, and the tenants alike with credit solutions that increase their flexibility without predatory traps and high interest rates, where they can actively optimize their credit reporting simply by making those necessity payments that we are speaking about today that are so high in percentage. We are offering tenants a financial marketplace for their largest average expense that is coming up every month, and to related topics such as insurance, utilities, security deposits. Now that we're in wave 3, we want to show you how to alleviate the cash cliff with our financial solutions. We call that 360-degree payments. So we want to offer basically any payment solutions, any which way the tenants are comfortable paying with, because the payment itself has become such a burden, including in-store payments over the phone, including MasterCard, Visa card, BMO, Union Pay, and a lot of further payments. I will show you that in detail in a brief demo. But this makes the situation again heterogeneous in payments, right? So with all these payments coming in, our new platform still gives you, as a property manager, overview about these payments, even if you have such heterogeneous payment types, even if your tenants actually make use of all these different payment solutions. They sum up in a dashboard and keep you they give you an overview at all times. Okay, so I think we all agree that you as a property manager, you have a lot to manage. And this is why we have added more solutions to our new LetUs platform to help property managers and tenants alike along this value chain from the very beginning, often in our world, the apartment listing, to application management and screening, and also screening tenants, security deposit alternatives, and much more. But before I becoming too theoretically, let me jump into the platform to show you how LetUs looks actually. Okay, great. I'd like to start and show you what the tenant sees and experiences. And afterwards, I will, of course, also show you the property manager's perspective. Because if there's one thing that we learned over the years, it needs to be easy to use for the tenants as well. Because if there's one thing that we learned over the years, it's this solution needs to be easy for the tenants. Keep it easy, otherwise the tenants will not use it, which I personally totally understand. Okay, so once I logged in, it takes me to the tenant dashboard. It gives me all relevant information for me as a tenant. And of course, I can make a rent payment, which I will show you soon. But next to making a payment, I, as a tenant, have also access to our partner services. So in this case, we are showing a property manager who has enabled the credit reporting functionality, which I briefly mentioned before in the presentation for this specific tenant. That means that any of the payments my tenant is making, they will be directly pushed to the credit bureau. So tenants can therefore actively increase their rental score just by making a rental payment. And then we also have an insurance functionality here, which is, I think, also very interesting and something that we are very excited about, because in the past, property managers were often telling us that there's a certain problem that comes along with insurance monitoring, because a high amount of tenants actively decides to sign up for an insurance, however, then uses the cancellation period within the first 14 days and is then basically uninsured. And this is a certain risk for the property manager, because I'm not necessarily speaking about damage waivers only. What happens if the entire apartment burns down, for example? And this is why in the first instance, if a property manager likes, we can enable to monitor that for him. Here, we're still in a tenant's perspective. Here, the tenant is getting asked whether he has an existing insurance in place, or whether he needs to buy a new insurance. And then he gets a very competitive rate from one of our partners, in this case, in the EU area. We're just asking him a couple of basic questions. Then we have a sample address over here. You can add, I'm just making up a fictive address just to show you how it would look like. Where the insurance company is asking a couple of very basic questions. And we are even offering a promo code in this example, which can be further incentive for the tenants. And then it's basically live. The company is deeply embedded. We're directly crunching the numbers, as one can see, and giving a comprehensive rate that suits the needs of the specific tenants. And this is it, basically. Back to the tenant's perspective. We therefore can basically make sure that the tenant has an active insurance. So this is basically giving the property managers a real chance to keep overview about their tenant population with our dashboard on the property manager side on LetUs. How many of my tenants are actually insured? How many have received an insurance recently? And we can therefore overcome this issue of the 14 days cancellation policy because the property manager gets full visibility within LetUs here. Okay, but then of course, the hygiene factor, one needs to be able to make a payment as well. So I, as a tenant, I got the ability to use a variety of payment options here. Visa, MasterCard, but also debit cards, Union Pay, American Express. And we often had the example, for example, with our student housing clients, when a foreign student is currently in Canada and needs financial support from the parents, for example, then the parents can help out with either Union Pay, this is very often used, or American Express overseas, but of course with all other solutions as well. And something that we're very proud about, we are the first ones in our sector that are offering to pay with PayPal as well. So a tenant can make his rent payment via PayPal. And this is, it's quite a news. And there's a further functionality that goes along with that. At the beginning, we were identifying a new cash cliff. This cash cliff was making long-term credit solutions necessary. And this is what we're offering here too. So a tenant can now get a interest-free loan to make a rent payment as well. And we therefore want to, of course, also mitigate the risk and decrease the risk on the property manager side. Okay, so now you know how the tenant side would look like. Let me now introduce you to the property manager's perspective. Directly when we log in as a property manager to LetUs, it brings me to the property manager dashboard. So this one here, it gives me all relevant information and it shows me, for example, how many of my tenants haven't yet made their rent payment and are therefore overdue. So here we use a comparatively large sample to make the number very well visible. You also see your pending applications. I will go back to this a little later and explain a bit more in depth. And the processing volume in comparison to last year. We are having a look at the collected rent processing volume on this graph. Okay, so being a property manager, I of course need some properties. So once we brought in the properties that you manage, LetUs is very flexible when it comes to select your bank accounts. You can, for example, use a custom merchant account setup. We therefore mean that each property can be tied to a certain bank account, both connecting plenty properties to one account or having each individual bank account for the certain property. So all options are given here. This is also very applicable, for example, for franchise structures. Now, as we have properties, we also need managers, of course. You can decide about whether a manager is administrator, whether the manager has access to all properties, but no access to the reporting section and the admin sections, or whether a property manager only has access to certain pre-selected properties. Now we have properties, we have managers. I think we also need some tenants here. And you can very, very easily set up the tenants here. So let's have an example. There's one possibility to manually set up your charges here for your tenant. This goes very quick and is applicable for medium to large size property management companies. Of course, we also have solutions in place for property management companies up to 20,000 units plus, because we're very integration friendly. You can basically directly push the required information into LetUs with the most property management systems here, and decrease your workload massively at this stage. There are two logics applied. Firstly, you have the monthly charges. You can select between a couple of types of charges, and add the corresponding amounts. And this is then basically a reflection of the tenant's rental contract. And here you see what a tenant then basically owes you. You can also change that by adding a one-time charge. For example, if a tenant is overdue on a certain rent, or you can also add a one-time credit. For example, here in British Columbia, a BC housing surplus. As I just mentioned, this can also be entirely automated, and the charges logic can also be switched off. So if you just want to make your tenant, or want to enable your tenant to make a rent payment without an underlying charge, this would be feasible as well. Okay, one further thing that I'd like to mention, here you can, as a property manager, upload documents, and on the other end, the tenant can see those documents as well. For example, the housing rules, bylaws, exchange IDs, a copy of the lease. This is a certain degree of tenant communication that we're offering here. At the very beginning, I was already mentioning the application process. So if an interested person wants to become your tenant, they can fill out a form online and send the data to you via LetUs. And this is pretty cool because we can send an email, or we can also create a custom landing page for your company. Let me show you how that would look like. So tenants could be forwarded to this landing page. And then you can let's make a nice example here, very easily apply for this property by just stating some basic information. And as you can see, we are already starting to collect critical information. For example, the SIN and SSN number. And then we forward within this application process. However, we are also taking this a step further, because a further feedback over the time was that tenant screening is increasing in importance. So we have partnered with a provider that runs background and credit checks. And you can very well see that here. Let me show you an example. In our example, this tenant has applied, and background check and credit check functionality has been activated by the property manager. You then get a very detailed, decent report about your tenant, which can, of course, support you in making your decision about a certain tenant. We know that some businesses already have solutions like this in place, but I think we're one of the very first one that have all these solutions in one platform. Same functionality, by the way, for credit checks. again, you're getting a very comprehensive report about your tenant's credit situation. Basically, we want to again decrease the property manager's risk here and support in making an educated decision about a certain tenancy. Yeah, this is a functionality we are really excited about because you now have the entire application process out of one hand with very competitive prices for both background check and credit check. Here, you use all transactions. I always like to state the example: if a tenant is not sure about whether a foregoing payment in the past went through or not, you can search that up. Let's make an example. A tenant called Jay claims that he has made a successful payment in February, but he is charged by you again. You can just double check, have a look, and can see very well that in February the payment did not go through due to NSF, which is also then very supportive in the discussion. Finally, and I think this is very important as well, is a reporting section. We are giving access to the most necessary reports directly here. And of course, all these reports are downloadable in CSV files or Excel files. We even have a lot of property managers as clients that are actively using these reports to support their accounting functionalities and to, again, make comprehensive decisions based on these informations. You can see overdue charges. You can see all transactions. You can see payments that have settled on the EFT report and are therewith through, and also get reports about your entire tenant situation and your entire tenant population, and also download that. For large property management companies, we have also created custom reports, for example, to again mitigate their current risk and to see how many of the payments are already through and how many are yet outstanding. So there's a lot of room for you as a property manager to work with these tools that we're giving you. Okay, I hope I was able to give you a brief overview about our product here. Thank you very much at this stage. And let us switch back to the presentation. Fantastic. That would be it from our end today. I hope I was able to give you a little overview about what we are doing here at LetUs and also about what we are intending to achieve. In a nutshell, what can I say? We want to enable your tenants to make a rent payment from their sofa with a mobile device, with the payment method of their preference, even if they're in a distressed financial situation. And we therewith massively decrease the property manager's risk and can even contribute on their revenue, but with also providing a win-win situation for the tenants alike. And if you have any questions in regards to that, please do not hesitate to contact me. And it was a pleasure